Hi, everyone. I've been struggling with this for weeks, and I need to vent, or maybe get advice. I don't even know where to begin. I'm Sarah, 33 years old, and I've always known one thing about myself. I don't want kids. That's it. No deep trauma, no secret hatred for children. I just don't feel the pull to become a mom. It's my life, my choice, right? Well, not according to my mother, Alice. To understand where I'm coming from, you need to know a little about my family. My mom is intense. She's the type who believes family is everything, and by family, I mean her vision of what family should look like: a husband, kids, traditions, and everyone following the rules she's been laying down since before I could talk. I've always felt like I didn't fully belong in her world, but I've managed to tiptoe around the big issues, until now. Lily, bless her heart, tried to jump in too. Alice, I think. No one asked you. Mom barked. I'd had enough. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not doing this, I said. I'm not going to sit here and let you guilt-trip me into a life I don't want. Mom stood up too, her hands shaking with rage. If you walk out that door, don't expect me to welcome you back with open arms. Fine, I said, grabbing my purse. If that's how you feel, then maybe it's better this way. And just like that, I walked out. The days after that dinner were a blur. I didn't hear from Mom at all, but Dad called me the next morning to check in. He said he didn't want to take sides but hoped I'd think about things. David texted me too, apologizing for not standing up to Mom more. I told him it wasn't his fault. Mom had steamrolled the entire conversation, and there wasn't much he could have done. But the silence from Mom was deafening. A week later, I got a call from Aunt Karen, Mom's older sister. Karen has always been the black sheep of the family. She never married, never had kids, and lives a quiet, happy life with her dogs and her art studio. She's also the only person in the family who really gets me. I heard about the dinner, she said, skipping the small talk. Of course you did, I said bitterly. Mom probably called you the second I walked out the door. Actually no, Karen said. David told me. He's worried about you. I'm fine, I said automatically. Are you? She asked. That question broke me. I spilled everything. How hurt I was by Mom's words, how I felt like I'd never be good enough for her, how exhausted I was from years of trying to live up to her expectations. Karen listened without interrupting, and when I was done, she said something I'll never forget. Sarah, she said, your mom loves you, but she's trapped in her own idea of what life should look like. That's not your problem to fix. You need to live your life for you, not for her. I didn't think things could get worse after the family dinner, but I underestimated my mom. Alice is not the kind of person to let things go. If she feels wronged, or in this case, if she doesn't get her way, she takes it as a personal mission to set things right. And apparently, setting things right meant turning the entire family against me. The first sign that she was up to something came when my cousin Jenna called me out of the blue. Jenna and I aren't particularly close. She's 10 years younger than me and still in college, but she sounded hesitant and awkward, which was unlike her. Hey Sarah, she began. So, Aunt Alice called me the other day. She was, pretty upset. Of course she was, I said, rolling my eyes. What did she say? Well, Jenna paused, clearly trying to figure out how to word it. She said you told her you didn't want to be part of the family anymore. And that you, insulted her and Grandma and basically said none of us matter to you. What? I almost dropped my phone. That's not what happened at all. I told her I didn't want kids. That's it. Yeah, I figured, Jenna said quickly. I mean, it didn't really sound like you, but she was so worked up. I just thought you should know. I thanked her and hung up, my stomach churning. This was classic Alice, exaggerating, twisting the truth, and playing the victim. But I wasn't prepared for how far she would take it. Over the next few days, I started getting cold messages from various relatives. My Uncle Mark sent a vague text about how family is important, and we need to support each other, not tear each other apart. My cousin Rachel unfollowed me on Instagram, which was ridiculous but still stung. Even my great Aunt Margaret, who's practically a saint, left me a voicemail saying she was disappointed in me for disrespecting the family. And then there was Facebook. Mom isn't the most tech-savvy person, but she knows enough to make passive-aggressive posts aimed at me. One day, she posted a photo of her and David with the caption, "So proud of my son for understanding the value of family." Some people just don't get it. Another time, she shared an article about the selfishness epidemic in modern society, adding her own comment. This really hits home. Sad but true. People started commenting, of course. You're such a good mom, Alice. So sorry you're going through this. Family first, always. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could she turn this into a public spectacle? And why was everyone just eating it up? Jake, my boyfriend, tried to keep me grounded. You can't control what she says or does, he told me one night as we sat on the couch. Just focus on your own life. The people who really know you will see through her bullshit. He was right, but it was easier said than done. Every time I opened my phone, there was another reminder of how much damage Mom was doing. And then she pulled her boldest move yet. She organized a family meeting. I didn't even know about it until David called me. Mom's hosting a family meeting this weekend, he said cautiously. She's inviting everyone. Like, literally everyone. What? Why? She says it's to clear the air, but you know how she is. It's going to be a shit show. I groaned. So what? She's just going to ambush me in front of the whole family? Probably, David admitted. Look, you don't have to go. No one's forcing you. But I knew better. If I didn't show up, Mom would spin it as me refusing to face the family or some nonsense like that. So I agreed to go, even though I knew it would be a disaster. The meeting was held at my parents' house, of course. When I arrived, the living room was already packed with relatives. My parents, David and Lily, my Uncle Mark, Aunt Karen, Jenna, Rachel, and a few others I barely knew. Mom was in the center, holding court like the queen of drama. As soon as I walked in, she gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Sarah, so glad you could join us." "Yeah, sure," I muttered, sitting down on the edge of the couch. Jake came with me, thank God, and squeezed my hand for support. Mom wasted no time. "I called this meeting because I'm deeply concerned about the direction our family is heading," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "There's been tension lately, and I think it's important that we address it together." "Tension?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the fact that you've been spreading lies about me to everyone?" There was a collective gasp, and Mom's eyes narrowed. "I haven't lied about anything," she said, feigning innocence. "I've simply shared my feelings. If people are upset, that's because they care about this family." "No, they're upset because you've been manipulating them," I shot back. "You're making me out to be some kind of villain because I don't want kids. How's that fair?" Uncle Mark chimed in, trying to play peacemaker. "Let's not point fingers. We're all here to support each other, right?" "Support?" I said, glaring at him. "How is it supportive to guilt-trip me and turn the whole family against me?" Mom's facade cracked. "You've already turned your back on this family, Sarah," she snapped. "You've made it clear that you don't care about our traditions, our legacy, or our future. How do you expect me to feel?" "I expect you to respect my choices," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just asking you to stop attacking me for living my life." The room was silent for a moment, and then Aunt Karen spoke up. "Alice, I think you need to take a step back. Sarah's an adult. She doesn't owe anyone an explanation for her decisions." Mom looked at her like she'd just grown a second head. "You would say that," she hissed. "You've always encouraged her to go against the grain." Karen shrugged. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be treated like this. You're not helping anyone, Alice. You're just pushing Sarah away." That hit a nerve. Mom's face turned bright red, and she started ranting about how she'd sacrificed everything for this family, how ungrateful I was, and how she was only trying to do what was best for everyone. It was exhausting. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I stood up. "Enough," I said. "If you can't respect my boundaries, then I'm done. I'm not going to keep subjecting myself to this toxic behavior." Mom's jaw dropped. "You're really going to walk away from your own family?" "I'm not walking away," I said firmly. "I'm setting boundaries. If you can't accept that, then yes, I'll limit communication." With that, I grabbed after the family meeting. I thought I had reached my breaking point with Mom. I was wrong. That was just the prelude to what would turn into the final, irreversible fallout. At that point, I thought we might be able to salvage something. A truce, maybe, or at least a distant, polite relationship. But Mom had other plans. It all came to a head when she asked to meet me at a cafe 2 weeks after the disaster at her house. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to block her number and never look back, but Jake convinced me to give her one more chance. "What if she's ready to apologize?" he said. "You might regret not hearing her out." I doubted it. Mom doesn't apologize. Still, I showed up at the cafe, arriving a few minutes early so I could mentally prepare myself. The place was quiet, with just a few people sipping coffee and working on laptops. I picked a table near the window and ordered a chamomile tea, hoping it would calm my nerves. Mom arrived 10 minutes late, as usual. She swept in like she owned the place, wearing her favorite navy blazer and a strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. She sat down across from me without a word and ordered a cappuccino from the waiter. "Thanks for coming," she said, folding her hands neatly on the table. "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted. Her smile tightened. "Well, I appreciate that you did. We need to talk." "Okay," I said cautiously. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she was trying to figure out the best angle of attack. Finally, she sighed dramatically and said, "Sarah, I've been doing a lot of thinking since the family meeting. And I've come to a decision." My stomach tightened. This didn't sound good. "Your behavior has made it clear that you don't value this family," she continued, her voice cold and deliberate. "You've disrespected me, disrespected your father, and turned your back on everything we stand for." "Mom, that's not true," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She held up a hand to silence me. "Let me finish. I've tried to be patient with you, Sarah. I've tried to guide you, to help you understand what's important in life. But you've refused to listen. And now I have no choice but to take action." "What does that even mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "It means that until you change your mind and start making better choices, you are no longer part of this family. Do you understand?" I stared at her stunned. "You're disowning me? Because I don't want kids." "It's not just about that," she snapped. "It's about your attitude, your selfishness, your complete disregard for everything I've worked so hard to build. You've left me no choice." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, this is insane. You're throwing me away because I won't live my life the way you want me to?" She sat back, crossing her arms. "You're the one who made this choice, Sarah. Actions have consequences." I felt a surge of anger and hurt like I'd never experienced before. If that's how you feel, I said, my voice shaking, then fine. I'm done trying to please you. I'm done being manipulated and guilt-tripped and made to feel like I'm not enough. If you want to cut me out, go ahead. But don't expect me to come crawling back. Her expression didn't waver. I won't. And just so you know, I've already spoken to our lawyer. You're out of the will. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. When I left the cafe, I felt numb. The reality of what had just happened didn't fully sink in until I got home and told Jake. He was furious. What kind of mother does that? He demanded. She's literally blackmailing you with money. It's not about the money, I said, though it still hurt to hear her say it. It's about the principle. She's punishing me for not being who she wants me to be. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. I tried to focus on work and my friends, but Mom's actions kept haunting me. She wasn't content to just disown me. She was actively working to turn the rest of the family against me. I found out through David that she had started calling relatives one by one, telling them her version of events. She's saying you're a bad influence, he told me during one of our phone calls. That you're selfish, ungrateful, and don't care about anyone but yourself. She's lying, I said, furious. I know, David said. But not everyone sees through her like I do. Uncle Mark already told me he doesn't want to get involved, and Aunt Margaret is siding with Mom. Even Rachel is buying into it. The worst part was that Dad didn't do anything to stop her. I called him, hoping he might talk some sense into her, but he just sounded tired and defeated. You know how your mother is, he said. She's stubborn. Maybe you should try apologizing, just to smooth things over. I didn't do anything wrong. I snapped. I know, he said quickly. But it might be easier if you just... No, Dad, I interrupted. I'm not apologizing for living my life. After that, I decided to take a step I'd been avoiding. I blocked Mom on all social media. It felt like cutting off a limb, but I couldn't handle her posts and messages anymore. Every time I saw her name pop up, it sent me into a spiral of anxiety and anger. Of course, that didn't stop her. She found new ways to get under my skin, like sending letters through the mail or enlisting other family members to guilt-trip me on her behalf. At one point, Aunt Margaret showed up at my apartment unannounced, clutching a pie and a rehearsed speech about how family is everything and life is too short to hold grudges. I'm not the one holding a grudge, I told her. Mom is. And until she respects my boundaries, I'm not going to engage with her. Margaret sighed, looking genuinely sad. I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn, Sarah. You're only making things harder for yourself. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to slam the door in her face. The final straw came when David called me again, this time sounding more serious than usual. Mom's been pressuring me to cut ties with you, he said. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why? She says that if I keep supporting you, I'm betraying the family, he explained. She's even threatening to take me out of the will too. Are you kidding me? I said, my voice rising. I wish I was, he said. But don't worry, I'm not going to cave. I just thought you should know. That was it. I knew there was no salvaging this relationship, no way to reach any kind of understanding with Mom. She was willing to destroy everything, her own relationships, the family dynamic, even her legacy, all because I wouldn't live my life on her terms. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I cut her out completely. No more phone calls, no more meetings, no more letters. I told David and Karen and anyone else who would listen that I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. If they wanted to stay in contact with me, great. If not, that was their choice. It's been months since I've spoken to Mom, and while it still hurts, I know I made the right decision. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Jake's hand and walked out. I don't know what happens next, but I do know one thing. I'm done letting Alice control my life. When I decided to completely cut ties with Mom, I expected fallout. What I didn't expect was how divided my siblings would become over the situation. My younger brother, Michael, called me almost immediately after hearing about the cafe incident. Michael had always been the most laid-back in the family, the peacekeeper who avoided conflict whenever possible. But this time, he didn't hold back. Sarah, I don't know what the hell is wrong with Mom, he said as soon as I picked up the phone. She's acting like a dictator. It's like, if you don't fall in line, you're out. That's not normal. Tell me about it, I replied, half laughing, though there wasn't anything funny about the situation. No, seriously, he said. I've been thinking about it, and she's been like this for years. Manipulative, controlling, always trying to force her version of reality onto everyone else. It's not okay. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Hearing Michael call out Mom's behavior so bluntly was a relief I hadn't realized I needed. It felt like someone was finally validating my feelings, like I wasn't crazy for thinking she was out of line. Thanks, Michael, I said, my voice cracking slightly. That means a lot. I feel like everyone else is either ignoring it or siding with her. Well, not me, he said firmly. I don't care about the will or her stupid power plays. I'm on your side, no matter what. But not everyone felt the same. My younger sister, Jessica, called me a few days later, and the conversation was the complete opposite of the one I'd had with Michael. Jessica is Mom's mini-me in every way. Same fiery personality, same obsession with appearances, same need to be in control. I should have known where her loyalties would lie. Sarah, I don't know what you're trying to prove, she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. But you're tearing this family apart. I laughed bitterly. I'm tearing the family apart? Really? What about Mom disowning me and turning everyone against me? She wouldn't have had to if you weren't so selfish, Jessica snapped. All she's ever wanted is for us to be a close family, and you've completely ruined that. By not having kids? By living my life the way I want to? I asked incredulously. It's not just that, she said. It's your attitude. You act like you're better than the rest of us, like you're too good for tradition and family values. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I love this family, but I'm not going to sacrifice my happiness just to fit into Mom's mold of what a perfect daughter should be. Jessica scoffed. Maybe you should think about someone other than yourself for once. That was the moment I realized there was no reasoning with her. Jessica had completely bought into Mom's narrative, and nothing I said was going to change her mind. I hung up the phone feeling even more isolated than before. The contrast between Michael's support and Jessica's hostility was jarring. It felt like I was caught in the middle of a war, with Mom and Jessica on one side and Michael and a few neutral family members on the other. And then there were the people who refused to pick a side, like David. He tried to stay out of the drama, but his silence felt like a betrayal in its own way. It was around this time that Jake suggested I start therapy. At first, I resisted. I didn't think talking to a stranger would help, and part of me was afraid they'd take Mom's side too, like so many others had. But Jake insisted. You've been through a lot, he said gently. You don't have to carry this alone. So I finally made an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Miller. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a calm, soothing voice that immediately put me at ease. At our first session, she asked me to tell her why I'd come to see her, and before I knew it, I was spilling everything. My decision not to have kids, the fallout with Mom, the family meeting, the cafe ultimatum, everything. Dr. Miller listened without interrupting, nodding thoughtfully as I spoke. When I finally finished, she said, "It sounds like your mother has a very specific vision of what she wants her family to look like, and she's struggling to accept that you don't fit into that vision." That's putting it mildly, I said, rolling my eyes. She's using control and manipulation to try to force you into compliance, Dr. Miller continued. That's not healthy, and it's not fair to you. Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For so long, I'd been doubting myself, wondering if I really was the selfish, ungrateful daughter Mom made me out to be. But Dr. Miller saw through the facade. Over the next few weeks, therapy became my lifeline. Dr. Miller helped me unpack years of emotional baggage I hadn't even realized I was carrying. She pointed out patterns in Mom's behavior that I hadn't seen before, how she used guilt as a weapon, how she played favorites among the siblings, how she always made herself the victim in every conflict. And she helped me start setting healthier boundaries, not just with Mom but with the rest of the family too. One of the biggest breakthroughs came during a session where we talked about Jessica. I told Dr. Miller about our phone call, about how hurtful it was to hear my own sister accuse me of being selfish. It sounds like Jessica has internalized a lot of your mother's values, Dr. Miller said. She might see siding with your mother as a way to stay in her good graces. That's exactly what it feels like, I said. But it still hurts. Of course it does, she said gently. You expect your siblings to have your back, and when they don't, it feels like a betrayal. But remember, Jessica's behavior says more about her relationship with your mother than it does about you. That perspective helped, but it didn't make things easier. Jessica continued to make snide comments about me during family gatherings, and Mom encouraged her. Michael tried to shield me as much as he could, but even he admitted that the tension was unbearable. Honestly, Sarah, I don't know how much longer I can deal with this, he said one day when we met for coffee. Mom's relentless. She keeps calling me, trying to get me to turn against you. What do you say to her? I asked. I tell her to back off, but she doesn't listen, he said, shaking his head. I'm this close to cutting her off too. Hearing that broke my heart. I didn't want Michael to feel like he had to choose between me and Mom, but I also knew how toxic she could be. It was a no-win situation. Around this time, I also started leaning on my friends more. One of them, a woman named Elena who I'd met at work years ago, became my rock. Elena had her own complicated family history, and she understood what I was going through in a way that few others could. You have to do what's best for you, she told me one night over drinks. If that means cutting people out, so be it. Blood doesn't give anyone a free pass to treat you like shit. She was right, of course, but it didn't make the decision any less painful. It started with a text message from Michael. You won't believe this, he wrote. Mom's planning a symbolic family lunch next weekend. She's invited everyone, and she told me there will be an empty chair for you. I think it's her way of guilting you. I stared at the screen, stunned but not entirely surprised. Mom had always been theatrical, but this felt like a new low, even for her. The idea of her hosting a lunch with an empty chair to highlight my absence felt like something out of a bad movie. I could already picture her sitting at the head of the table, sighing dramatically and telling everyone how I had abandoned the family. What the hell? I texted back. She's been calling it a gesture of hope, Michael replied. She says it's a way to show that the door is always open for you to come back. But it's obviously just another manipulation tactic. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could she think this was okay? Did she really believe this would make me feel guilty enough to cave? Jake, who was sitting next to me on the couch, noticed my expression. What's wrong? He asked. I handed him my phone, and his face darkened as he read the messages. Unbelievable, he muttered. She's literally staging a public shaming. This isn't about hope. It's about control. Exactly, I said, feeling the familiar knot of frustration tightening in my chest. She's turning my absence into a spectacle. It's humiliating. Are you going to say anything? He asked. I shook my head. What's the point? Anything I say will just fuel her narrative. She'll twist it to make me look like the villain, as always. The days leading up to the lunch were tense. Michael kept me updated on Mom's plans, and each new detail made my blood boil. She'd invited over a dozen relatives, including distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. She'd hired a caterer and ordered floral centerpieces for the table. And, of course, she'd made it clear to everyone that the empty chair was reserved for Sarah. She's milking this for all it's worth, Michael said during one of our phone calls. She even called me last night to practice her little speech. She's planning to say something about how she's keeping the family together, even in the face of heartbreak. It's so fake I almost laughed. By the time the day of the lunch arrived, I was seething. I tried to distract myself by running errands and cleaning the apartment, but I couldn't shake the anger and humiliation. It wasn't just about the empty chair, it was about everything that led up to it. The years of manipulation, the constant guilt trips, the way Mom had turned my personal choices into a public spectacle. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "It's happening," he wrote. "I'll keep you posted." An hour later, he sent me a photo. It showed the dining room table at Mom's house, beautifully set with china and silverware. The centerpiece was a massive bouquet of white roses, and there, at the far end of the table, was the empty chair. I stared at the photo, my stomach churning. Even though I wasn't there, I felt exposed, like my absence was a tangible presence in the room. Michael texted me again shortly after. "Mom just gave her speech," he wrote. "She got all teary-eyed and said something about how family is the most important thing in life and how she hopes you'll find your way back to us someday." Everyone ate it up. Even Dad looked emotional. That stung more than I cared to admit. Dad had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker who avoided conflict at all costs. He rarely voiced his opinions, especially when it came to Mom. But the fact that he hadn't spoken up, that he'd just sat there and let her manipulate the narrative, felt like a betrayal. A few hours later, Michael called me. "That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever witnessed," he said as soon as I picked up. "Mom's speech was bad enough, but then Jessica chimed in and started bashing you. She said you were too proud to admit you were wrong and that you were tearing the family apart." "Of course she did," I said bitterly. "She's been Mom's mouthpiece this whole time." "It gets worse," Michael said. "Uncle Mark stood up and said something about how he hopes you'll realize the error of your ways. Even Aunt Margaret joined in. It was like a Sarah bashing session." "Great," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "So now the whole family hates me." "Not everyone," Michael said quickly. I didn't say anything and neither did Dad, but you could tell he was uncomfortable. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "Did he defend me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Michael hesitated. "Not really. He didn't say much of anything. But after lunch, he pulled me aside and said he thinks Mom's taking things too far. He said he understands why you're upset." That surprised me. Dad had always been passive, content to let Mom run the show. Hearing that he'd even acknowledged her behavior was a step in the right direction, but it wasn't enough. "If he really understands," I said, "why doesn't he do something about it?" "Because he's Dad," Michael said simply. "You know how he is. He hates confrontation. He'd rather keep the peace, even if it means letting Mom walk all over him." Later that evening, Dad called me. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure what to say. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "How are you doing?" "Great, Dad," I said sarcastically. "I'm doing fantastic," knowing there was a whole lunch dedicated to shaming me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I didn't agree with what your mother did," he said finally. "I thought it was excessive." "Then why didn't you say anything?" I demanded. He sighed. "You know how your mother is. She means well, but she gets carried away." I didn't want to make things worse. "Worse for who?" I shot back. "For her. Because it sure as hell hasn't been easy for me." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Sarah." "I really am." It wasn't enough. His apology felt hollow, like he was trying to absolve himself of guilt without actually taking responsibility. That night, I sat on the couch with Jake, replaying the conversation in my head. "I don't know why I even bother," I said. "Dad's never going to stand up to her. He'll just keep enabling her, no matter how much damage she causes." Jake put an arm around me. "Maybe he's too scared to rock the boat," he said. "But that doesn't mean you have to put up with it. You've already taken a stand, and that's what matters." He was right, of course. I couldn't control Mom or Dad or anyone else in the family. The only thing I could control was how I chose to respond. And for now, that meant focusing on the people who truly supported me, Michael, Jake, and my friends. As for the empty chair, it would stay empty. I wasn't prepared for the phone call that came one rainy afternoon. Michael was the one who broke the news, his voice tight with a mix of worry and frustration. "Mom's in the hospital," he said. I froze, the words echoing in my ears. What? What happened?" "She had some kind of stress-induced episode," Michael explained. "Apparently, she fainted at home, and Dad called 911. They're saying it was a combination of exhaustion and anxiety. She's stable now, but they're keeping her for observation." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt a pang of guilt, even though I knew I wasn't responsible for her condition. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and manipulated for years, felt numb. "Are you going to see her?" I asked finally. Michael hesitated. "I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about all of this." I didn't blame him. Our relationship with Mom had been a tangled mess for so long that it was hard to separate genuine concern from the weight of all the unresolved issues. Over the next few days, updates trickled in through Michael and, surprisingly, Jessica. Despite her staunch loyalty to Mom, Jessica reached out to let me know what was happening. "She's asking about you," Jessica said during one of our rare phone calls. "She wants to see you." "Did she say that?" I asked cautiously. "Well, not exactly," Jessica admitted. "But I can tell she misses you. This could be a chance to start over." I sighed, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Jessica, I've been waiting for her to take responsibility for her actions for years. I'm not going to pretend everything's fine just because she's in the hospital." "She's not perfect, Sarah," Jessica said defensively. "But she's still our mother. And that doesn't excuse her behavior," I shot back. I ended the call feeling drained, the familiar ache of family conflict settling in my chest. A few days later, Michael decided to visit Mom in the hospital. I called him afterward to see how it went. "She's trying to play the victim again," he said bluntly. "She talked about how hard this has all been for her, how much stress she's under because the family is falling apart. But she didn't acknowledge her role in any of it. Did you call her out on it?" I asked. "Of course I did," he said. "I told her point blank that her behavior is the reason things are so messed up. But she just deflected like always. She said she never meant to hurt anyone and that she's just trying to do what's best for the family." I sighed, the knot in my chest tightening. "So nothing's changed." "Exactly," Michael said. "And honestly, I'm done. I can't keep doing this, Sarah. I've tried to be patient, but she's never going to take responsibility. It's exhausting." His words hit me harder than I expected. Michael had always been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to mediate and keep the family together. Hearing him say he was ready to cut ties with Mom felt like the final nail in the coffin. "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. "I'm cutting her off," he said firmly. "Completely. I've already told Dad. He wasn't happy about it, but he understands. And Jessica, well, you know how she is. She called me selfish and said I was abandoning the family, but I don't care anymore. I need to put my own mental health first." I was proud of him for making that decision, even though it hurt to see the family fracture even further. But his choice only solidified my own resolve. Meanwhile, Mom was released from the hospital a week later. I knew this because Jessica sent me a text. "Mom's home now. She says she's ready to talk whenever you are." I didn't respond. Instead, I poured my energy into therapy and rebuilding my life. Dr. Miller helped me see that my relationship with Mom didn't define me, and that I had the right to set boundaries without feeling guilty. I started spending more time with friends like Elena, who had become my biggest cheerleader. "You're doing the right thing," Elena said one night over dinner. "Sometimes the only way to heal is to walk away from the people who keep hurting you." Her words stuck with me, and over time, I began to feel a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. But I knew I couldn't completely ignore the situation forever. So one evening, I sat down at my desk with a blank sheet of paper and started writing a letter to Mom. It wasn't easy. I must have crumpled up a dozen drafts before I finally settled on the right words. In the letter, I laid out everything I'd been feeling. The pain, the frustration, the years of manipulation and guilt. I told her that I loved her but that I couldn't have a relationship with her unless she acknowledged her behavior and made real changes. "I'm not asking for perfection," I wrote. "I'm asking for honesty, accountability, and respect. If you're willing to work on that, I'm open to rebuilding our relationship. But if not, I need to protect my own peace and focus on the people who truly support me." I mailed the letter the next day, unsure if I'd ever get a response. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Jessica, of course, didn't approve. "How could you send Mom a letter like that?" she demanded during yet another heated phone call. "She's been through so much already, and now you're putting conditions on your love for her?" "It's not about conditions," I said calmly. "It's about boundaries. I'm not going to let her manipulate me anymore, Jessica. If you can't understand that, then maybe you're part of the problem too." She hung up on me, and I didn't bother calling her back. Michael, on the other hand, was nothing but supportive. "You're doing what's best for you," he said when I told him about the letter. "That's all that matters." Over the next few months, I threw myself into my work, my friendships, and my relationship with Jake. I started taking yoga classes, picked up painting as a hobby, and even adopted a rescue dog named Daisy. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the weight of my family's expectations, free from the constant drama, free to just be myself. Mom never responded to the letter, but that was okay. I wasn't waiting for her to change anymore. I was finally moving forward, and that was enough.